Today we're digging into American foods that are perfectly legal to buy at your neighborhood grocery store and completely illegal almost everywhere else. Because most of us grew up assuming the FDA is the gold standard, that if something is stamped USDA approved, it's basically bulletproof. Except a lot of the rest of the world looked at the exact same products sitting on American shelves and said absolutely not. And we're talking bans or restrictions in well over 160 countries for reasons that go way past too much sugar or too many calories. So let's actually get into the specifics instead of just the shock value. Most raw chicken sold in the US gets a last-minute antimicrobial rinse, often chlorine-based, designed to kill off bacteria like salmonella right before the meat hits the shelf. And while the European Union banned that practice back in 1997, the real objection was never really about the chlorine exposure itself, which regulators admit is fairly minor. The actual argument is that a last-second chemical fix lets farms get away with lower hygiene standards earlier in the process, because everyone knows the rinse will clean it up at the very end anyway. And that single disagreement over philosophy is exactly why chlorinated chicken has remained one of the most stubborn sticking points in US trade negotiations with both the UK and the EU for years now. But if a rinse on the outside of your food is enough to raise eyebrows overseas, wait until you hear what's happening on the inside of it. Because ractopamine, a feed additive given to pigs in the final weeks before slaughter, specifically to pack on lean muscle and cut down fat, belongs to the exact same drug family, beta agonists, as some asthma inhalers. And that single fact is why more than 160 countries, including the entire European Union, China, and Russia, have banned or heavily restricted its use in meat production, citing documented links to elevated heart rate, tremors, dizziness, and muscle spasms in humans who consume enough of it, which is also the reason American pork exports have historically been turned away at ports in some of the biggest meat importing countries on the planet. Not because of spoilage or disease, but because of a pharmaceutical additive most everyday shoppers have genuinely never heard of. And if a drug quietly showing up in your bacon sounds unsettling, the bright coloring in your candy aisle has its own long and complicated paper trail too, because synthetic dyes like Red 40, Yellow 5, and Yellow 6 have been connected by a number of studies to hyperactivity and behavioral changes in children. Which is exactly why the European Union has required warning labels on foods containing them since 2010, and why certain dyes remain restricted or discouraged in specific EU member states. Though here's the genuinely current twist most versions of this topic miss. The FDA itself has finally started moving in the same direction, having formally revoked authorization for red dye 3 in January of 2025 under the Delaney Clause, after data linked it to cancer in lab animals, and having since announced a broader plan working with the food industry to phase out the remaining major petroleum-based dyes, meaning the long-standing gap between American and European candy aisles is actually beginning to close for the first time in decades. Not every food ban on this list is even about health or safety, though, which is worth remembering before you assume every banned label automatically means dangerous, because Coca-Cola remains completely unavailable in North Korea, purely as a result of a decades-long trade embargo that has nothing to do with the drink's ingredients. And the same brand was cut off from Cuba after the United States imposed its 1962 trade embargo, a political decision that had absolutely nothing to do with sugar content or food safety, and everything to do with geopolitics. And just to prove that not every single ban needs a dramatic health scare or a sweeping trade dispute behind it at all, Sweden actually barred M&M's from using its signature lowercase m branding back in 2016, after a Swedish court ruled that the logo was confusingly similar to the lowercase m used by Marabou, a beloved domestic chocolate brand that had already been using its own version of that branding since the 1960s, decades before M&M's ever entered the Swedish market in 2009. So when you put all 5 of these stories side by side, You end up with 5 completely different American foods and 5 completely different reasons for getting shut out overseas. A pig growth drug that mimics stimulant medication. A chicken rinse that's really a stand-in for a much bigger hygiene argument. Candy dyes that America is only now beginning to catch up on. A soda caught entirely in the crossfire of Cold War-era politics. And a chocolate brand that simply lost a trademark lawsuit, which really does prove that banned abroad doesn't mean just on one thing. It means 5 very different stories. And knowing which is the real difference between understanding actual food safety and just repeating internet folklore.